I'm here to show you guys just exactly how incredibly easy it is to take your Gundam model kit from looking like this, the bare plastic, just nipped off the runner, freshly assembled look, to this, the battle-worn, weathered, damaged, realistic look that it no longer looks quite so much like a plastic model and is a bit closer to resembling an actual machine that's been into the heat of battle. Not only is the actual painting process to get this look extremely simple, but so is the list of materials we need in order to pull this off. At its barest level, this is all you need. Paint. You're going to want some kind of gray metallic. You're aiming for something that is more of a cast iron than a bright silver. It's okay to go somewhere in between. But this is going to do the majority of the work in really bringing our model kit to life. Now, as for brushes, you're going to want to go cheap and small. Doesn't have to be super small, but fairly small, just enough to get into all those detailed areas of the model kit. The fineness of the tip does not matter. It can totally be a little beat up and worn. In fact, this process of dry brushing to get the paint on there is a little aggressive and will likely end up wearing down on your brushes a little bit. So try to go for a multi-pack if you can. Just get a couple at once from a craft store, and that's all you really need. Fancy art brushes are totally unnecessary. Our dry brushing technique is going to call for the use of a paper towel to clean extra paint off of the brush, because you want to have as little paint on the brush as possible when you're dry brushing. So have a roll of paper towel in order to do that. One of the most useful tools for model building is actually a toothpick. This lowly instrument helps when you inevitably get paint or ink somewhere you don't want it to be. Of course, you can use other tools to scrape it off. You can use Q-tips, you can use an eraser, you can use an X-Acto knife, but this has the advantage of having a very fine point, but is not strong enough to actually scratch the plastic and damage the kit. So toothpicks are quite useful, and I would always have a couple of those on hand for whenever you're modifying a model kit. And lastly, for our most accessible set of materials is going to be some method of panel lining. If you don't know, panel lining is the process of filling in some of these cracks and crevices in the model kit with a bit of ink, so they look kind of shadowy and recessed and imply a level of detail that is literally just plastic that is lower than the rest of the surface area around it. So a marker with a fine tip or a pigment liner is all you need to do that. These are quite cheap, maybe like $3 at the craft store if you live in the US. There are other brands you can get. The Sakura brand is great. If you get the Mr. Hobby official Gundam markers, you're basically buying the same product right here. This is just the easiest way to do your panel lining. Okay, I know that bottle of lighter fluid looks silly, but hear me out. This is not necessary. This is just how I'm gonna do this today. Sometimes when you're panel lining, it is helpful to use an actual panel lining ink fluid, which will use capillary action to kind of guide itself through the panel lines in a way that can be sometimes less tedious than using a marker and to do it by hand. So when you use one of these, you need some kind of chemical cleaner in order to wipe up the excess and clean up the mess. Similarly, if you use one of the official Mr. Hobby Gundam flow type liners, you might need like alcohol and Q-tips to clean that up too. So again, marker is fine. I'm just going to use this in combination with the marker. Another optional material is a second metallic gray color. This one's more of a silver to the darker, more iron color that I showed you earlier. I like to kind of have the contrast of the darker iron gray on the inner frame and on the weapons, and then to have the silver where the armor's kind of been scratched and scuffed, because that difference in variety is really visually interesting. One more thing before we get started, I'm going to be attempting to create a kind of heated metal effect on the sort of tomahawk weapon this guy has, because in canon these are like thermal weapons that can heat up. So I've got some kind of fiery colors here and more of a fine point brush that I'm going to try and do a bit of more detailed painting on. So that's kind of the scarier part of this. Again, totally optional. Similarly on this kit, not quite as complex though. These kind of stripes on the shoulders and on the spike on the horn, those are paint because I don't think the stickers look very good. As well as like the little gold details on the thrusters on this guy. So sometimes it helps to have a fine point brush to do some of the more precise details if you want to add a little bit of extra variety to the appearance of the kit. So our first step is going to be using our markers and our panel lining fluid to bring out all the different cracks and crevices in him, the little seam lines between his parts that aren't actually part of the model kit, but just details molded into the surface of each piece. So the Zaku's kind of an interesting kit where it doesn't have a lot of panel lines that aren't real, compared to other kits at least. A lot of these, like all these on the back of the legs here, those are actual splits between the parts. So there's a real legitimate like gap there between all these guys. So these parts we don't actually need to line, but there are some like in all these pipes around this guy that we're going to want to go ahead and fill with some ink, and there's some on like the wrists here that we'll want to ink in. So we're gonna jump into that now. I do want to point out one thing though. This kit comes with a rubberized flexible skirt. I did not clip mine out very well, I guess. I think I tried to use a hobby knife when nippers worked a lot better. Also, I don't know how well this will take paint and ink, so I'm going with the plastic skirt on that. And then two, anytime you panel line, this kind of dark gray color, the panel lines don't stand out super well on that because it's like black on dark gray, right? So you can do it if you want, but its effect and how noticeable it is, I don't know if it's necessarily worth the amount of work it takes to do that. So again, go for it if you want. It does add a little extra detail. There is a little more shadow in the crevices and crannies of the suit when you do that, but I will just be focusing on the armor bits. And oh yeah, like under that shield, there's a bunch of stuff we can line in there. So I've always found it easier when painting or panel lining to partially disassemble the kit. That way I can more easily access the different pieces I'm going for without having to constantly move things out of the way. So like I've kind of split it up into some of the most difficult sections for panel lining, right? Because like this bottom half, it doesn't need anything except for the skirts because all of these panel lines are real. So let me repeat, if there is an actual split between parts where these are like separate parts, you do not want to panel line in those. It's not going to look good. The ink will not, there's nowhere for the ink to go. So it'll have like ink on the sides of it, but not like in the actual panel line. And it's just going to look funny. So focus on the areas where there is a line, a kind of seam between parts that isn't real, is just molded plastic. And you're going to go ahead and fill those with your ink. So first let me show you the easiest way to panel line, again using one of these pigment liner markers. It's really simple. All you have to do is find your panel line and you literally just trace the marker along the little channel that's been molded into the kit. And as you can see, it's got a bit of shadow in there. As I pull the figure further away, you can see how the detail on the line that I have inked stands out a whole lot better than the one that isn't inked. You'll also notice I messed up. I kind of slipped out of the channel, and let's see if I can get the camera to focus. That happens. When that happens, you take a Q-tip, sometimes you can take your finger, and you just wipe it away. And simple as that. I fixed it. I think I smeared a little bit onto this orange. But yeah, the ink will take a bit to fully dry, and it smears off really easily if you get it where it's not supposed to be. So now, totally fine. That is a panel-lined panel line. Bada bing, bada boom. Now, method number 2 for panel lining is going to use a panel lining ink fluid like this guy, or it would be very, very similar if you used one of the official Gundam flow type markers, except instead of using lighter fluid to do our cleanup, you're going to want to use just like alcohol or something, because it doesn't smell quite as strongly. So when you're panel lining with the marker, that can get a little tedious. So sometimes it helps to have a bit of capillary action as your friend. So the way this panel liner works is really cool, because I just have to find our panel line and then kind of touch near it. And as you can see, the ink, almost like magic, just flows where it needs to go. And you don't have to do any sort of tracing at all to get it to do that. Bada bing, bada boom. Science, baby. So yeah, that's the process for using a panel lining ink or the flow type marker. You dab onto the panel line, you let the capillary action do its thing, and then you're going to want to give it 10, maybe 20 minutes for it to dry before we go and try to fix up those little smudgy splotches where you dab the ink. One note with this stuff though, both the flow type marker and an actual panel lining ink, they are somewhat harsh chemicals, and if you let them pull up, they might eat through the plastic. So it's pretty easy to avoid this. Make sure the ink does not flow between parts. So if there is an actual separation between two parts and the ink flows down into the actual recess between the parts, it can get stuck in there and be unable to dry. And then of course, if you just like dab in like a ludicrous amount of ink and just drown the part in the ink, that also will crack it. So it's easy to avoid that. Just stay vigilant and you'll be fine. So capillary action is pretty cool. That's literally the science that keeps our blood going through our veins, our, capillaries. One problem though, this looks like doo-doo. It's all splotchy and gross. So that brings us to our secret Gundam building technique. Arson. Lighter fluid. So what you're going to do, you take your gross part, and you take a bit of lighter fluid. I got some in this little lid here. Take a Q-tip, and you dab your Q-tip in, dab off the excess lighter fluid, and you are literally going to just start mopping up the splotches. And cleaning this guy right up, easy as. This method requires basically no skill, no precision. It is a very much, for the most part, turn your brain off kind of task, which is my kind of task because I have a small brain. Without lighter fluid or a enamel thinner or something like that, you're not going to be able to just rub this off with your finger like you can a marker ink. So you do need something to help clean it off if you're going with this method of panel lining. And also, too, the other issue with this method is that it smells. Both the actual panel line ink has a bit of an odor, lighter fluid has an odor. I mean, even if you use one of those Gundam markers, the markers themselves have a slight odor. And of course, alcohol, like if you want to use like an isopropyl, that's also going to have a little bit of a smell. So the markers kind of one up you there. And then two, I constantly feel like I'm going to spill this. You can't spill the marker. So there's pros and cons to the different methods. Try both if you can. This is generally more expensive than a marker is going to be. And I tend to use a combination of both. So start with a marker. That's what's cheap, that's what's accessible. And if you like the look of panel lining, get yourself an upgrade. Prepare to commit arson and have some fun, you know? That's what Char Aznable would want. Probably. I don't know. I'm not a member of the Principality of Xeon. Anyways, so that's kind of a bit of a sneak peek of what that's going to look like, all cleaned up. As you can see, it's a little smudged, so I think I need some more fluid. But yeah, there we go. It's kind of lifting the rest of that off. So yeah, there's that, all panel lined up. As I noted, one of its weaknesses for cleanup is that it doesn't just rub off. When you just rub it with your finger, it, you know, eventually if you rub long enough, you're gonna slowly erode through it, but it won't easily come off. This is a strength when you consider that once you've got it looking good, it won't accidentally rub off. Even when the marker has dried, sometimes you will accidentally rub a bit of your panel lining off. So that is one strength of this type of panel liner, and one thing to watch out for if you are using a marker. I noted earlier that I like to use a combination of different panel lining methods, and I just kind of want to walk you through a scenario where I'd use one and a scenario where I'd use the other. So on certain types of geometry, it's really hard to trace around with a marker. These parts straight up, the actual crevice, the line I'm filling with ink is very deep, and I'm not able to get in there so well with the marker. And additionally, because of the shape of it, it's just a pain to have to trace around this type of piece. So this is the kind of piece, absolutely 100% use the panel liner ink fluid. Sometimes there are wider panel lines than what is standard, I think. So kind of like this one right here. This one is a little bit wider than the other panel lines. It's kind of hard to tell, but the fluid likes to stick to the edges and the sides of the kind of recessed section there because of the capillary action. So it can sometimes work against you, and you'll want to use the marker to fill the whole thing in. I will try and give you an example of what I'm talking about here. Because on this piece, we've got these indentations here. So I'm going to go ahead and take our lining fluid and dab that into there. Yeah, and as you can kind of see, if I get the angle right, it's getting all around the edges of that recess, but it is not filling out the center. Now, if the indentation here, if the recess is big enough, that's probably what you want to aim for. But in smaller details like this, I want that whole section to be black. So I'm going to take my panel liner marker and just fill the whole thing in. Of course, this is up to you. And I do have one major note on this topic, one warning, and that is once you've got that fluid in there and you say, oh, I don't like how that looks, do not immediately jump in with the marker and fill it in, because that fluid, that enamel, has some kind of chemical in it that is not nice to the marker, and it will make your marker stop working if you use it in there before it is dried. Same goes with the lighter fluid. If you clean it out, you got to let it dry first before you jump in there with the marker. So I'm going to go ahead and get this other one here filled completely in. And sometimes with the way these inks are, it takes a second to get a good surface covered, but like hopefully you can kind of tell there that that is completely black, whereas the other side has the middle of that recess is completely exposed and not covered by ink. So there he is. All his recessed molded details have been inked up and stand out really great. Of course, it's not perfect. If you get up real close, you can tell that there's some smudging, some unevenness that isn't totally perfect. But you know, unless you're going right up close to it, it looks pretty solid. It's hard to notice something like that. So, especially because we're about to make them look all beaten and bruised up, those inconsistencies will basically disappear. So this is totally an okay status to have them in, and if you ask me, is undeniably an upgrade to just having the bare plastic. One more time, I did not touch the gray parts or the weapons or anything, just because I don't think it's worth it. And before we get to painting, I just want to mention that this is what one of those pour type Gundam markers looks like. I just remembered I had one. So it's got a head kind of like that. And this head does basically the same exact thing as the Tamiya panel lining ink that I was using. So that's that. So the first step to the painting process is going to be to dry brush the inner frame. When I say the inner frame, I'm referring to all the kind of like more mechanical unarmored parts that are underneath of the like colored armor. So all this gray stuff, you know, the bottom of the foot, the knees, and the joints. Same with the elbows and the shoulders. Get the hand. Of course, the Zaku's got this big gray section in the center of its chest that I'm gonna get, and then the weapons too. So everything gray is just going to get a nice dry brushing of our metallic paint. Again, if you go on the two color method and you kind of have the darker, more like gunmetal color and then a brighter silver color, you probably want to go with the darker one on the inner frame parts here. So the way that dry brushing works is essentially take the paint, put a little bit on the tip of the brush, don't smother the brush, and then you want to wipe most of it off onto the paper towel so that the brush is more or less dry, so it just leaves a trace of the paint as you actually go to apply it. That's why it's called dry brushing. So then you start to paint your metallic on, and what you really want to focus on is not trying to coat the whole thing in one solid color. You're not trying to make the part gunmetal, but just to scatter about those little metal flakes that are in the paint and really texture the part more than paint it. That's kind of how I like to think about it. And it's a really simple brain dead process where you just kind of apply the paint. Sometimes this dabbing, stippling motion gives you more of a randomized texture, more natural looking metal texture than actually, you know, using brush strokes to paint it on well. But it's really quite simple. You go in, you just start dabbing, you start painting, you get the metal flakes on there until it looks good. Make sure you are moving the part so that you are exposing all of it that possibly can be exposed, and there's no section of the part that is unpainted, because like sometimes like, oh, there's a section in the knee here that no one can see until I actually open the knee. And then of course you can handle the part even with the wet paint on there. I mean, just don't like rub it very much, but like gently touching it to prod it back and forth doesn't really mess up the paint at all, because it's dry brushed on and it's nice and resistant for just gently handling it. So you don't really need to be worried about it too much. It's really easy to do. When you inevitably get paint onto the colored armor section and you need to get that off, that's what your toothpick is for. You literally just rub it off. It's super simple. Sometimes you can just use a finger. But yeah, that's how the process works. And there you have it. A part nicely coated with a bit of a metallic sheen. No visible brush strokes. It's just kind of randomly dabbed on there as best as you can. And, you know, not a lot of it on the armor. Again, sometimes it ends up on there. Just rub it off. Oh yeah, there's a lot in there. But it's really easy to do. And even when you do get it on the armor, our next step will be actually painting the armor. And a lot of the times the places where you get the inner frame paint on the armor, that's where you're gonna paint the armor anyways. Because essentially the same edges of the armor where it catches the paint would be the edges of the armor where the mobile suit would catch scuffs and scrapes as it goes about in its environment and does battle with other Gundams and mobile suits and stuff. Yep. So we go ahead and apply that process to all of the inner frame bits of the kit to give all that gray a nice metallic edge to it. Really bring out all those details, give them some cool texture to properly elevate him from being more than a plastic model kit. Same on the weapons. So that takes us to our next step, which is going to be all the scuff mark details. So if you've got that brighter silver paint, that's when we're going to pull this guy out. Also, you're probably going to want to assemble your kit. A lot of times when you're doing this, you want to be able to see the full picture of the model to really get a good grasp on where you've got the scuffs concentrated, and sometimes you kind of have to try and tell a bit of a story just visually with where the scuffs and dings on the model kit are. So our process for detailing up the armor is going to be very similar to what we used to do the inner frame. We still want to be dry brushing, use as minimal paint as possible because we're not trying to totally coat the surface in this silver color, or if you're still using your other darker gunmetal iron gray, same thing. We're going to try and focus on the edges of the geometry on his armor, and especially things like if it's got spikes or points. We want to make sure that the paint is concentrated in those areas, and generally when you're doing this, you want to be thinking about what areas of the mobile suit are going to be making contact with other things if this was an actual real combat unit, you know? So if it was going into battle, its arms and legs are probably going to take the brunt of the damage from blocking things, bashing up against buildings, and, you know, being knocked around. If it falls to its knees, its legs are going to get all scuffed up. So you really want to think about that. And just generally, rule of thumb is if you stick to the edges, you'll be great. So like if you're painting more in just like the center of a random area, or like a large, nice, flat kind of surface here, that's not as realistic to be the most common location for it to be scuffed like that. So you do want to scuff it there, because it's gonna happen, but you want to keep those fewer and far between. So maybe if you scuff up the right thigh, you leave the left thigh a lot less marked up. And then if you're scuffing up like the left skirt area or whatever, leave the right skirt area unprompted, you know? If you're doing something on the right side of his head up here, then leave the left side of his head mostly unmarked. But then there are also flat areas like a shield where, oh, yeah, he's going to intentionally be using this to block attacks and stuff. So this shield, even though it's just as devoid of edges as like this thigh area here, or like the skirt, or this part right here, this is going to be really marked up from all the battle damage that he's taking. So anyways, I'll just kind of start to show you what I'm talking about. We can ignore our weapons for now because we're just focusing on the armor. So I guess I'll just jump into things here. So same thing as before, grab our paint, a little on the tip of the brush, and go ahead and wipe most of it off onto your paper towel until it's just leaving a kind of faint trail. And then take your mobile suit, and like I said, focus on the edges. So we're just gonna kind of gently highlight those edges. And you don't want to go all up and down on an edge. So see how I kind of got this whole edge from top to bottom here? I don't want to repeat that on the same time. So on the same like this other side right here on the same leg. Because you kind of want it to look natural, right? So if he gets a bunch of dings here, it would look a little funny if he had the exact same amount of damage on this side. That's what I'm saying. So focus on spreading out the damage and mixing up where it is. So if this leg has the outer side of the leg is scuffed from top to bottom on this edge, and this inner side just has a little toward the bottom here, maybe we want to do something different on the other side of the leg. So maybe the outside of this leg is just scuffed in this middle section here. But then the inner section, I think I just said outer, the inner section is scuffed at the top and the bottom, but not in the middle. Make sure you're getting the actual edge of the part and you're not leaving like this kind of outward facing section unmarked, because like you want the paint on both sides of the geometry and not just one. And that's basically the whole process. Sometimes you just do a little bit here and there, real bare and light. Other times, like especially on these shin areas that would take a lot of damage, maybe on like the shoulders or on the hands, you're going to focus a lot more on that spot. So like on the hand, you know, think about every time it punches something, or its knuckles get bashed into something, or it's blocking with its hand. These are the areas that are going to take a lot of damage. So you really want to focus on that area. Also the feet, think about how it's stomping through all sorts of terrain and, you know, buildings, and it's walking across cars or, you know, the machinery on the outside of a spaceship or whatnot, wherever it is on the battlefield. So the area around its feet and lower legs is going to be really dinged up and scratched up. So yeah, just go for it. Again, think about what might have done the damage and where the damage is going to be the most in each spot on the mobile suit. And I guess to kind of demonstrate, like, oh, this kind of thigh area, maybe it was in a battle and like some kind of mobile suit threw a kick at it and it just takes a gouge out of this leg, right? There's no edge to highlight like we're doing down here on the shins. So you just kind of have to go ahead and try your best to just scratch it just with a little brush stroke. Just boop, boop. And you've got some nice scuff marks there that look kind of like a realistic little bit of scratching into the mobile suit. Sometimes you do a little more. And again, if you ever feel like, oh shoot, I did too much, you can just take your toothpick, rub it off, even the back of the paintbrush, rub it off, and try again. It's really easy. So you're going to use a lot of brush strokes on this in order to highlight the actual edges of the geometry. But a lot of times when you've got like a more open, flat, large surface, your just like dabbing, stippling method is gonna be what you want to use in order to add texture. So if you've got a big flat area, just go ahead and boop, 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 dab, dab, dab. And then on the edges, that's when you use your brush strokes to get those all highlighted. One other thing you can do is take your toothpick and just kind of stab it where you've painted, and that'll add an extra bit of texture from where you're scraping it off and make it look even more like scratches. Anytime you've got a corner, corners are going to be areas where a lot of impacts happen. So the corners are probably going to be some of the most scratched up parts of the mobile suit. So make sure you're getting a lot of paint on those sections. If you have a nice kind of round corner, that's still kind of a corner, an area that's going to be a hot spot for a lot of damage happening. Any bits of pointy geometry, a lot of the Xeon style kits have spikes, so parts like those are just like corners where they kind of stick out from the rest of the geometry and are going to be the location where a lot of damage occurs. Of course, spikes might be used as like weapons deliberately in order to attack other mobile suits. So all the paint near the tip of the spikes is going to get chipped off. Like I said, this process is not always nice to your brushes, so sometimes you need to pause, wash all the paint off, make sure you actually get all the bit that's dried into it, make sure you get it all out in the sink, and then let it dry, because you need your paintbrush to be dry in order to do dry brushing. Alright, there he is, all beaten, battered, and scratched up. As you can see, like I said, you kind of just concentrate around the edges, and then on some of the flat spaces, you gotta do just some dabbing, stippling here and there to get a good look for them. So, next part I'm going to show you guys is how I'm going to do some customizing on the weapons. The first thing I want to do, let's keep with our silver paint. And we're just going to accentuate some of the little details on these weapons. But what we're going to do is go ahead and paint some of the parts that stand out the most on these weapons. So focus on the geometry that kind of protrudes from the rest of the weapon. This might be an instant for you to pull out your fine point brush. So there is that, some kind of bright silver highlighting on parts of the weapons just to bring them to life a little bit more. Pretty simple stuff. There is the heat hawk. The next thing I'm going to do is grab my fiery colored paints, draw that kind of glowing heated metal look on this heat hawk here. I might throw in some white on the edge, just to get that kind of like fading to white hot as the metal is thinnest at the edge look to it that I guess is kind of a technique used on like Warhammer miniatures for their similar type of heat weapons. And then I'm going to go ahead and do that scope on the hyper bazooka thing here. And there he is. Got some nice heat effects painted onto the heat hawk. And of course the lens on that hyper bazooka. Looking great overall, and is mighty fine standing next to his friend here. So yeah, both of them together look like they just might have went through the same battle. So there's how you do it. It's that easy. Not a lot of artistic skill needed to get a good look like this. So go for it. Have fun.